What's going on, guys? No for Life here, and today we are comparing two video games that really shouldn't be compared. Now, before we start, I wanted to say that this isn't a comprehensive trilogy review. This isn't Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 versus Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It is just of the first two games, Uncharted Drake's Fortune and Tomb Raider Definitive Edition. Also, I am playing the PS4 version of both of these games, and as for gameplay, my Tomb Raider disc is for some reason not working for gameplay, so I just recorded for Rise of the Tomb Raider, and I was planning on making a sequel to this video between Rise of the Tomb Raider and Uncharted Among Thieves. So, if you want to see that video, also make sure to leave a like. But these two games are definitely, in my opinion, the height of the adventure games. Adventure games are so much fun, and there's just a lot to both of these games. They really can't be compared. But today I decided to compare them just because I felt like it. And yeah, so without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so I will be comparing both of these games as for three categories: the story, the adventure, and the most important part in my mind, the gameplay. So yeah. So for the first category and the overall story would be characters. And to be completely honest, I don't really think that there's much competition here. Uncharted has really well thought out characters that you really care about, especially towards the end of the story. I mean, we have Nathan Drake, who is probably one of my favorite video game characters of all time. He's not really a hero, and he's not really a villain either. He's an anti-hero. He is really selfish, but the game uses this to its advantage in putting him in situations that we can see how good or how bad of a person he can be. And especially how sometimes he can be really rude to some people. We also have Sully, who honestly just wants to make a quick buck and get out. He is in a lot of debt throughout the story, and we can kind of see that he doesn't like being completely honest with Nate. But in Tomb Raider, there is a completely different story with completely different characters here, obviously. And in the case of Tomb Raider, I didn't really care about a lot of these characters within the story. I mean, anyone who isn't Lara Croft or Sam just is a random side character with some random dialogue. A lot of the cutscenes in Tomb Raider are shown via these cameras, and I think that this is a really cool idea. But throughout the game, there were only like 2 or 3 of these cameras, meaning that there weren't a lot of cutscenes and not a lot of things to keep me interested in that state of mind. And like I said, there just wasn't a lot of character variety, and there wasn't really anything to keep me interested in a ton of the characters in Tomb Raider. So I'm going to give this category to Uncharted, meaning it is Uncharted 1, Tomb Raider 0. Okay, next up is the theme. And honestly, I think both of these have a pretty decent theme, but I think that the main one that I would have to give it to is probably Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider definitely has a story about friendship, a story about saving your friends and almost like being helpful towards them. And this is done really well in my mind. And as I was saying, like, even though the characters, like, I don't really care about them, they are still alright in the manner of, hey, we're a group of friends and we're gonna stick together. But as for Uncharted, the theme isn't really bad, it's still kind of a damsel in distress story, which isn't the most interesting considering there's probably millions of those stories out there. And but it also, because these characters are so interesting, it leads you on this kind of goose chase even to go throughout these random areas, but the themes just don't really work in my mind with Uncharted. So I'm gonna have to give this category to Tomb Raider. Okay, and now our last category in the story category, which is dialogue. And this is, in my opinion, almost the most important aspect of cutscenes is having good writing. And in the case of Tomb Raider, it's just okay. There's nothing really impressive about the Tomb Raider dialogue. It feels kind of generic at times. But if you compare this to the amazing characters in Uncharted, it becomes pretty obvious what is going to win. There's jokes in Uncharted that will actually make you laugh, and there's jokes in Tomb Raider that not really. And overall, while Tomb Raider does have a better theme, which could add to having better dialogue, I just love the Uncharted dialogue a lot more, and it just has a lot more of that like uniqueness, which makes me just prefer it a lot more over Tomb Raiders. And that should wrap up our story category, so let's move on to the adventure category. And obviously, since these are adventure games, this is a really important aspect. So I have three subcategories inside of the adventure category, which is areas, uniqueness, and how realistic it is. So let's start out with areas, and this is going to be kind of variety. So how many areas there are. And both of these games kind of take place on like a deserted island almost, but they're able to have unique ways to make both of these deserted islands seem better, I guess, and like more interesting. And Tomb Raider, I think, does this the best. While Uncharted does have some interesting places, a lot of them kind of feel the same. Like, there's two or three fortresses in the game, there's a bunch of caves, it's kind of this, like, factory-like cave. Everything just kind of feels the same sometimes. I really like the jungle theme in both games, but especially Uncharted, but it doesn't really have as much of a variety of themes and areas, which is really interesting considering that Uncharted 2 has a lot of variety when it comes to those areas, but I just prefer Tomb Raiders. There's a lot of different things going on. There's a time where you're in the jungle, like near a lake, on some mountains. There's like a entire level where you're in a castle that's burning to the ground. There's ones where you're on top of a like huge tower with like in basically like the Himalayas or something. I completely botched that. That's my bad. But overall, while Uncharted does have some cool areas, I really do have to give this to Tomb Raider, meaning we are all tied up at 2. And next one, uniqueness. So how unique these themes are. And kind of like I said before, this one's of course going to go to Tomb Raider because of that variety, but also because none of the like zones in the game feel like they mix together. A lot of them feel like extremely different. Well, in Uncharted, it does kind of feel like they stuck to one theme, which makes Tomb Raider come back into the lead with winning the uniqueness category. And next up is how realistic these ones are. And honestly, this can kind of go either ways. Like, if it's super realistic, that's good. But if it's super kind of like fantasy element, but is trying to use fantasy elements, then I would appreciate that. And I think that these both like almost tie for me in my mind because like they do this so well. But I would probably have to go with Uncharted for this one. While Tomb Raider does have pretty realistic when it needs to be and pretty fantasy ones when it needs to be, it does kind of feel sometimes like uh, it just doesn't make sense. Like in the opening areas, everybody uses bows, and it's just like, oh, like they don't have guns here. Then they find like a gun, and or like then they find a bunch of guns, and then they start like spraying them around. It's like, okay, but eventually then like everyone has guns, and they have super powerful guns. It's just like, how how did they get these? And it doesn't really make sense per se. But in the case of Uncharted's perspective, it does because it's almost like a private army, and I just think that comparative to Tomb Raider, I feel like Uncharted wins this round, meaning we are all tied up again. Oh boy. Okay, and next up is the gameplay. Easily the most important part. And these two, I feel like, are definitely going to tie during the end. Oh boy. Okay, so the first category is stealth. I don't know who to give this one to. So we're gonna give it equally down the middle. So it's 4-4 because I think that they're basically equal in stealth. There's not really a lot of stealth sections in either game, but I think that they do it well enough, but neither one counters the other and has better stealth in my mind. Okay, next up is hand-to-hand combat. And honestly, I prefer Tomb Raiders a lot more. Well, Uncharted does have some cool stuff with like the hit square 4 times combo or the like brutal combo where it's square, triangle, square. That's basically it. There's not really a lot of variety, and a lot of the moves are constantly repeated, which is fine, but it doesn't really work out in my mind. Well, Tomb Raider's combat is just a lot more interesting. There's a lot of different elements that you can use, and even combat during stealth can be pretty fun. So I'm going to give this one to Tomb Raider. Okay, and next up is something that for some reason is in both of these games a lot, which is gunplay. And you would think that this would probably go to Tomb Raider, considering Uncharted is rated T for teen for some reason, and Tomb Raider is rated M for mature. But no, I'm actually going to give this one to Uncharted. Uncharted and Tomb Raider both have kind of the same types of guns, but Uncharted has a bigger variety. So Tomb Raider has a bow, rifle, pistol, and shotgun, I think. And while that's basically what you also have in Uncharted, minus the bow, plus a rocket launcher, I prefer when there's like more like weapon variety in the fact of, oh hey, like there's like an AK-47, but there's also an M4. Like you can kind of choose between the two, like if you want to, which in my opinion is done well in the game, as when you get to harder stages, like the enemies are going to have better weapons, and eventually you can pick up those better weapons. And I just feel like it's a bit more smooth in Uncharted, so I'm gonna give this category to Uncharted. Are we seriously tied again? Okay, which means we're ending it off with the final category. The biggest thing of both of these games, platforming. Climbing, also known as platforming, is done extremely well in the Uncharted games. Unfortunately, that's not as much of the case in the first one. I love the platforming in Uncharted 2 and especially 3. But in the case of Uncharted 1, there's not really a lot of variety here. Sometimes you'll be able to use ropes, beanstalks, but most of it you're just kind of jumping around climbing. There's not a ton of variety overall in how the platforming's done, which makes, again, a lot of these segments kind of mix in for me, which means I'm giving this one to Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider has a lot of these really cool scenes where you'll be like running from like a chase and like things will be exploding, or like you're on a bridge that's about to fall down, and it just has a lot more of the like climbing stuff that I appreciate. Things that don't feel like super like just thrown in there. So yeah, this means that if we tally things up here, I guess I prefer Tomb Raider. So it looks like uh, Tomb Raider has won this round. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. This was my comparison of Tomb Raider and Uncharted. This was actually a really fun video to make. I really enjoyed playing both of these games, and they do have a lot of things that make them really different and really fun. So, yeah, if you guys enjoyed, like I said earlier, make sure to leave a like and even a comment to say if you would like to see a Rise of Tomb Raider versus Uncharted Among Thieves video. So, thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see everybody in the next video / live stream. Bye.